Now. Shall I start the welcome once more? Good morning, everyone. Those who are just joining across the world, those on site will have to suffer through a second introduction. My name is Peter Schniering. I'm the founder of Future Cleantech Architects, and together with UNIDO, with the UN Climate Change Global Innovation Hub, we are co-hosting this day or co-organizing this day on green hydrogen. You have heard a couple of very interesting statements in the opening reception, and now we want to talk together with a lot of experts throughout the day. We want to talk about hydrogen, its potential, but also its limits in detail. And in particular, we want to talk about the needs in research and development and what should be prioritized along this way. So, welcome everybody here. I would like to introduce two of our panelists on site and one virtual one. We are still missing Martin Mueller, but the minute he arrives, he'll take a seat in the front row as well. So as I said, we want to take a realistic assessment of where hydrogen is right now in the world. Because what you hear a lot, everybody's talking hydrogen these days. It's everywhere. Some call it hopium. Those who are very skeptical, some see it as the silver bullet for everything, from industry to transport to everything else. But where is it right now? And I'm very pleased to be joined by, on-site, by two experts. Oh, and virtually by another two. Martin, good to see you there. So let me briefly introduce those experts, tell you what they are doing, because they are all working on hydrogen intensively. And then we will discuss where this important element is right now and where the energy sector on this is. So sitting here next to me, and the first speaker I would like to introduce, and maybe we can show the slide once more on the overview of the panel, is Noam Boussidan. He's platform curator on energy at the World Economic Forum. He's currently working on accelerating the energy transition with a focus on clean hydrogen. Thank you, Noam, for being here and taking the time. Next to Noam is Magnolia Tovar, whom we've worked with a long time. She is Global Director of Zero Carbon Fuels with Clean Air Task Force, a very impactful US organization developing or working on a lot of topics towards achieving a net zero world. Thank you, Magnolia, for being here. Magnolia has an engineering background and has also a lot of experience on working on actual hydrogen projects. Joining us online, and if we could see them again, dear coordinators there, we have Martin Mueller. Martin, nice to have you here. Martin is the Executive Director of the Academic Forum Geneva and running its Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, working on the Science and Diplomacy Anticipator. We'll hear more from you later, Martin. And joining us also is Bernhard Lorentz from Deloitte. He's partner and the global consulting's sustainability and climate strategy leader of Deloitte. Thank you both for dialing in. And now, without further ado, let's take a close look at where hydrogen is right now. And for this, the UN Global Innovation Hub and ourselves together, we have prepared some short animations for you. And if we could play them in the presentation, please. Maybe somebody can bring me the clicker from my team. That would be really neat. So you need to open presentation number 2, please. Right, it's a different doc. Because we thought, now everybody's talking green hydrogen. How big is the share of green hydrogen right now? This is what I also want to discuss with the panelists. How far do we have to drive the prices down to make it competitive? Thank you. And to show you this, look, take a look at this bar and you'll see what the global demand of hydrogen is made up right now and how strong the emissions are. So if we look at worldwide emissions, I'm sorry, dear panel, you have to see it from here. So if we look at worldwide emissions, the current share stemming from hydrogen is pretty big. We have compared it to the aviation industry, only CO2 that is. We're just comparing CO2. And it's almost at the same size. And why is that? This is because almost all the hydrogen produced in the world relies on fossil fuels. Look at this chart. This is, sorry, I'm too close? Yeah. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. I get stage directions all the time. Now look, this is the current production of hydrogen, fossil-based hydrogen. And you can see how small the share is that's really green, produced through dedicated electrolyzers or fossil fuels with carbon capture. The rest is either a byproduct or produced through coal and natural gas. So we're talking more than 98% is fossil-produced hydrogen, and it's massive emissions. It's almost as the emission share is as high as the entire aviation industry. For those who are climate nerds, there are other greenhouse gases and effects in the aviation industry. We know this, but still it's massive. Okay, let's look at something else. Why is that so? Why is the share so high? It's because a number of industries are already depending on hydrogen for a long time, such as refining and the fertilizer industry. Oh, sorry, I stopped it. I have to go back and play it once more. Wait. Now, let me play this one more time. Okay, so these industries depend on hydrogen now, while, wait, this plays a little longer. This is what we will need in the future to give you context. So if we want to decarbonize steel, if we want to decarbonize aviation with synthetic fuels, we'll need a massive amount of hydrogen. We'll provide the slides afterwards if you like. So, how do we get there? Look, this is the green bar I've just shown. So what we would need to do, this is where we are right now. And we need to phase out the gray and the black hydrogen, and we need to ramp up sustainable hydrogen, whatever that will be. And we'll have controversy on this. I can predict this already. Some people say only green. There's various types of producing hydrogen, obviously. Next one. And then I'll come to the panelists, don't worry. So what we would also want to show you is how much we need to drive down production costs to be competitive. Because if hydrogen is too expensive, what's the use of it? No industry with massive demand will actually change. So we will need to, this is an assumption, we will of course need a carbon price probably, but we will need to drive down the cost of electrolyzers massively. You can't read this so well. We will need to drive down the cost of green electricity, so renewables produced or other sustainable way produced electricity as well massively. All right, we come with a couple of recommendations out of this, what should be done, but we will discuss this now. I won't go through this now because we have the experts here on site, and there they are. So I would kindly like, sorry you had to move your seats, please. So I will start, dear online speakers, with our two panelists on site with a quick question, and then I will sort of refer to you. So starting with Noam right away. You work for the World Economic Forum, and we had a pre-discussion on this talk today, and I know about your background and your interest in all of these fields. Do you meet any misperceptions on hydrogen when you work, in your daily work, with the people you talk to, with the companies you work with the policymakers you speak to? What are misperceptions you meet in your daily life?
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. So thank you very much for the invitation, first of all. And I think, quite a lot of it was in your introduction. I think the common misperception, at least that I would, see, is hydrogen is the silver bullet. It's just going to save us all. Kind of hydrogen will save the world type of mentality. And yes and no. And I think your first point towards the end of your last slide was something that we should absolutely consider in much more detail, which is we need to make sure that we prioritize hydrogen where it is actually useful. And it is indeed, I guess, two main parts. One is those kind of key industrial uses today we have, refining, fertilizer production. We need to clean those and we need to massively scale them up. And that's going to require significant amounts of clean hydrogen. And I'm not going to get into the debates of blue or green, unless you really invite me to do that. low carbon, decarbonized kind of hydrogen. So I think that's the first step. And then indeed the second step is really trying to understand where, for those new applications, this kind of clean or green hydrogen is going to be utilized. Is it steel? Is it trucking? Is it shipping? And what are the timelines associated with these new uses? Because indeed, right now, you could argue aviation is not necessarily going to require massive amounts of hydrogen tomorrow, but perhaps the next day. So how do you kind of phase that approach in order to ensure that the massive scale-ups that are being required are also being put to good use? So to me, this is really the kind of the biggest misconception that we have to kind of make sure that we address.
Mm-hmm.
Hydrogen is an absolutely critical key to enabling a net zero future.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be not only massively scaled up, but massively decarbonized, including to date. I think what you kind of highlighted here is extremely important because it highlights the fact that today hydrogen is part of not so much the solution,
it's
but
a
kind
problem.
of the issue.
Yeah.
You know. So from a climate perspective, today we need to make sure that hydrogen switches from being part of the issue to being part of the solution, first of all, and then second of all, that it goes to where it is required. And then you can have a second series of questions that I'm sure we'll address in terms of how, when, why, at what cost, how do you do that, etc.
Great, thank you. Quick question back, I have a follow-up. In these fields, you sketched these fields very nicely of where, we need to ramp up and where probably we're wrong. Where do people, with people I mean people working remotely related to the field, so policymakers who need to take decision on of topics, including hydrogen, where do, like the common opinion, where are they most wrong? Where do people get it most wrong? Is it the readiness, or is it maybe the cost side, or what do you think? Is there one point where you could say, man, we really have to improve this to move the debate further?
I guess I guess there's the cost issue, which is obviously a very strong kind of dimension that needs to be tackled. But there's also just matters of availability of the product. I mean, to date we have, I think, 94 million tons of hydrogen kind of overall, and you showed that green bar. We're going to need massive amounts if we're going to do anything that is close to what we're aiming to do. So just making sure that there's enough supply and there's enough demand that come with this supply, I think is something that we just need to be sure that we kind of, capture the dimension of. And I don't think at this stage we are really there. Oh, hydrogen is going to help us, yes, but we need to produce that hydrogen. We need to make sure that there are buyers for that hydrogen. We need to make sure that this hydrogen is produced at an acceptable price, which requires a number of things.
Thank you. So it's the size of the challenge, basically. All right, Magnolia, over to you. Clean Air Task Force has been pushing these topics and continues to increase the efforts for more than 25 years. The debate on hydrogen is particularly controversial. I perceive it that way. What's the best way to go about it? What should we do, in which order, to drive up what Noam just summarized so well, so in order to drive costs down, drive production up, and get a realistic picture also of the infrastructure we need?
Hi, thank you so much, Peter, for that. So there are a lot of things that are needed to develop the hydrogen value chain. First of all, I'd like to say that today, like we were saying, we consume about 90 million tons of hydrogen per year. Most of it is used in the refining sector and for fertilizers production. But even if we would like to replace all that hydrogen with green hydrogen, it will not be possible. And the reason why is because hydrogen is also a byproduct of our industries. So a lot of the hydrogen is just being produced as a byproduct in refining processes and petrochemical processes. And replacing that with green hydrogen means shutting down units in the industry. So we have to understand that next to green hydrogen, we also need other technologies to decarbonize the industry. So if we go to the value chain development, First of all, the production of hydrogen with only renewable electricity is a massive challenge. I did some of the calculations before the event, and today we consume about 90 million tons of hydrogen. If we were to replace all that with green hydrogen, assuming it's possible, and we were install electrolyzers that are operating at 100% efficiency, renewable energy, right? But we know that the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, so 100% efficiency might not be possible, at least with solar and wind. We will need to install 850 gigawatt of electrolyzers. So that means, assuming that it's going to operate 100%, those electrolyzers, so 850, let's say. If we look at a more realistic picture, but it's still optimistic, about 30% capacity factor, good solar factor, 30% or wind, we will need about 1,800 gigawatt installed. Today, we have only 0.5. So you were asking me about development, right? We need to scale hydrogen production, electrolyzers for hydrogen production. And today the scaling capacity, the production capacity is about 8 gigawatt per year, right? In a world, fully decarbonized world, according to the IEA, we will need 530 million tons for hydrogen per year to decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors. And that means about 10,700 gigawatt of electrolyzers installed, operating at 13% capacity. So that's a massive challenge. So we need to be able to scale electrolyzers production capacity and also renewables capacity.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe let me add to that before I come to a follow-up question. It's not just a question of the industry ramp-up. So, of course, you need to have the production capacity in terms of machine tools and other available capacities to build these electrolyzers. It's also availability of resources. Some of these components require particular resources. We won't go into detail on this today, but it's a very important part, and I would like to make some quick promotion for session number 6 this afternoon, where we'll be talking to the innovators. So we'll be talking to people who do research and development in institutes and then try to scale this at the corporate side. And we'll hear in this panel later also a corporate perspective on this. But a quick follow-up on that, and Magnolia, I know you're not shying away from also making bold statements. What would it need? And I know this can be controversial and probably people will disagree on this, but I think we should open this discussion to that. What will it take to get the sufficient amount of clean electricity we might need just for the electrolysis, if we go the electrolysis way? And what would it need in terms of maybe also reducing demand in certain sectors or redirecting the way industries work to somehow turn this whole segment net zero until 2045, 2050 realistically?
So for the first questions, we know that renewable electricity is variable, right? So the sun doesn't shine all the time, as I mentioned before, the wind doesn't blow. So all the time. So we need, in addition to variable renewable energy, we need other sources of energy, like for example, geothermal, super hot rock geothermal, that provides this high firm base load of zero carbon energy. Also, we need to deploy hydrogen produced with carbon capture and storage, right? Because, as I mentioned before, some of these processes require other technologies to decarbonize, like carbon capture and storage. And then, the more energy we have available, I think it will help the development of the technology, right? So if energy is scarce and the value chain is constrained, it will be difficult to be able to develop the value chain. So we need more energy, more firm, low, zero carbon energy to produce the hydrogen. Yeah.
Thank you. Let's dive into this later. In the meantime, a comment. People waiting on the floor, please come in. There's plenty of seats. I'd also encourage our team to wave them in and show them seats. So you're all welcome. Great. And let's see what our remote participants are doing right now. If we could see Martin and Bernhard for a second. And this time, Bernhard, I'd like to start with you. Thank you for dialing in. Last time I saw you speak, it was at pre-COP at ThyssenKrupp. It's some years ago, where you moderated a panel. And I know you have a background in also attending COPs and attending the delegations to these sessions here. and to see what goes on and how we can drive this development from an international climate policy point of view and climate cooperation point of view. Now, if you look at what Noam and Magnolia just said, at this gap in what the world, or what a big part of the world thinks hydrogen can already do, and where it really is, and you also, through Deloitte, have all these corporate contacts, what will have to happen here in Sharm el-Sheikh and beyond to facilitate this development? Do you have an input on this, knowing both worlds, the corporate world and the diplomacy world? Oh no. He's frozen. This happens. Look, we are orchestrating a complex event here. So let's wait if we can bring these two gentlemen back online. And in the meantime, I would like to ask a question to Noam back, because Noam, Magnolia, I don't know if everybody in the audience noticed this. Magnolia also put up a couple of controversial topics, sort of alluded to them. Where do we get the clean power? Is nuclear part of this range? I come from Germany. In Germany, that's a very difficult discussion to, can we use our nuclear reactors a little bit longer, those we want to shut down, in order to not, be so hard struck by the gas crisis through the Russian invasion in the Ukraine? So these discussions, depending on the country, are very critical. And now, Noam, here's my question. I mean, topics Magnolia has alluded to includes, can we use nuclear power? It includes CCS, carbon capture and storage, which would not be pure green hydrogen anymore. And it involves a couple of other segments, alternative ways of producing hydrogen or switching industries to non-hydrogen processes. And I know you're not officially speaking for the WEF here, for the World Economic Forum, but as a private professional, as a person, what's your view on this? How can we foster this debate so we come to a result where we get tangible results?
So you come from Germany, I come from France, so we have a very specific approach to nuclear power as well in that part of the world. But so I think, the question that this raises is essentially the topic of certification. What is to date green hydrogen? We don't have an agreed upon definition, which, by the way, hinders quite significantly the development of the industry overall. Because if you don't know what exactly you're producing, you don't exactly know what you can sell, and then as a result, there's a bit of a lack of demand because people don't know what kind of product they're going to buy from you.
Uncertainty.
So there's a lot of uncertainty. So if you want to move away from blue is bad, green is better, nuclear is not acceptable, or it's acceptable, etc., you can take an approach which kind of just basically looks at a bit of a carbon intensity type of approach, and you kind of start to design thresholds. That's one approach that you could kind of look at. There's potentially other ways to do this as well, but essentially there's gonna need to be some sort of a coming together of ultimately the international community to say, this is what we believe answers to the definition of green hydrogen or low carbon hydrogen, whatever you want to call it, and this is what we know is going to kind of basically be acceptable on the markets. As long as we don't have that, we're still going to probably lack scale in terms of the development of this. Now, the other interesting bit on that is the fact that there's a number of kind of voluntary efforts that are trying to bridge that gap. Because it's almost the same as, the debate we had at COPs for a number of years on going around a global price on carbon. We need a global price on carbon. Yes, we do. But in the meantime, if we can't get a global price on carbon, how do we kind of operate? Well, here are some kind of regional approaches, voluntary type of markets, type of initiatives. You could argue the same is, to some extent, it's not a 100% comparison, but you could argue the same kind of approach could actually be needed or required as far as the certification effort is concerned. Because we don't have just yet an agreed upon definition of what is green hydrogen to date, there are still things we can do more on a voluntary type of approach. And there are, to date, initiatives that are trying to do that, to say, well, we got together and we believe that along these criteria, which, by the way, is not just related to carbon intensity, you could have a much stronger suite of criteria. We will call that green hydrogen as a consortium, bringing in industry, bringing in governments, bringing in policymakers, and that will help hopefully kind of snowball into making it an agreed upon definition by more and more.
So I would like, because we're doing some notes on this, we'll summarize in the afternoon. I would like everybody to know the carbon intensity kind of approach, which is great. We'll touch later upon this, Magnolia, but the gentlemen are back online. Hi, everyone. Great, you made it back. Bernhard, you were stopped. You froze the moment you wanted to answer. Do you want to continue? Maybe I wrap it up briefly. We can't hear you, unfortunately. Maybe you're still on mute.
I'm not on mute, so I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me?
You're live and you're very loud. That's great. Go ahead.
Great. My problem is that I don't know how much you heard from my last statement.
Nothing. You froze the moment you started to speak.
Let me answer your question briefly. I mean, your question was, what does it take and what does it need now at the COP? And I made my point that I think there are exactly the right things happen at the moment, where we have a platform where supply and demand get together. From my experience in the last weeks, where I had some 50 conversations about green hydrogen, what it really needs now is to get the finance, the supply side and the demand side together. And for this, we need to solve the bankability issue. I mean, John Kerry referred to it himself in a couple of speeches last week, and I think this is the key question. From what I heard, Magnolia pointed very out the size of the opportunity, but also of the challenge. And we are talking, of course, only green hydrogen made by renewable energies. And I would argue, Magnolia, that there is huge opportunity. If we look at Mauritania, what's going on in Namibia, with the European Investment Bank just invested 3 billion to support the Namibian green hydrogen investments, which would be enormous, already delivering via ammonia a lot of those molecules, green molecules, to Europe by 2030. You know that there are enormous demand both in the European Union due to the Green Deal, the transformation, but also now with this game-changing IRA Act, also in the US, I expect a lot of increase of demand. So I would say the demand question for green hydrogen is not my problem. We will solve the policies around this. From what I hear in the EU Commission, we are very far. I know that the German progressive government is thinking in the right direction. I think now it's about making big deals, getting the money together to make the investments in the global south, make the global south also a win-win for them and for the demand side in Europe and the US mainly. And we have to act fast as always with climate. It's really about making something in the next 12 to 18 months. That's, back to you, what I would like to see more of at COP.
Mic's off. Yeah, there you go. Okay, it was my microphone this time, Bernhard. So, okay. Quick second question to you. You were speaking about the bankability. And the bankability is, of course, closely related to what Noam just said regarding the uncertainty. We hear this from innovators, from large industry we're talking to, is they're not sure which kind of approach will be accepted. What will be accepted as, for example, sustainable, green, whatever. Can you say a couple of thoughts on what would this bankability require? Which specific steps would need to be solved?
I mean, I think we will, I mean, that's a fair point that Noah's making. I know the European, the US and the German debate very well. And I expect in the next 1 to 2 years to have a clear answer to the question, which quality policies will implement to accept green hydrogen and define both green hydrogen and the acceptable, being of course via CCS and methane reduction, blue hydrogen kind of product that we expect. This will be a game changer. The risk is still there because there is always this thing that investments in the global south and from a bankability questions are having this risk issue. What I expect, and we had seen some of the comments that Robert Habeck, the German Vice Chancellor, made on his way to Asia last week, that we will rethink our hedging our hedging of risks in investment in the global south. And I expect that there will be countries and investments, and particularly public banks like the German KfW, like European Investment Bank, like EBRD, who will leverage and really hedge those risks in order to make sure that we have the tons of money that we need to do the right things in the global south. That's what I expect.
Thank you very much. And with this, I would like to add a perspective by Martin. Martin, if you'd be so kind to first of all explain in a little detail, sorry, pardon, because people might not know it or might not be aware of it, what the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator is doing and what your role there is and what your view on this debate is we have just opened on the right way to scale hydrogen.
Well, thank you all. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you well.
Okay, fantastic. Well, first of all, many thanks for the invitation, and thanks to all the speakers for the very interesting comments that have been done so far. A quick word about who we are and what we do and what I do in these organizations. Well, the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator is a young foundation that has been established in Geneva a couple of years ago. It's really with this idea we need to anticipate, the science and technology of tomorrow, what's happening in the labs worldwide, and try to accelerate positive of those technological developments for humanity. And how do we do that? Well, we have set up task forces of scientists that identify what's happening in the labs worldwide, and we have made them working together with what we call diplomacy, so a coalition of high-level experts from governments, from international organizations, and from the private sector, to jointly identify which areas of science and technology have the biggest potential impact for the planet. And early on, when we were established, we thought that what's happening around decarbonization and green hydrogen is a place where there's a lot of happening, but we miss so far the acceleration of those developments in a way that would benefit society as a whole, but also it's not always clear to see, how can you set up the right coalitions of actors to make sure that you can enact sustainable change. On the debate so far, I think I learned a lot, and what we are doing in the space, we're also trying to say, how can we unlock the potential of those technologies? We have seen there's a lot of things happening around hydrogen. Our approach is, of course, that we need to consider the whole life cycle of those technologies. We mentioned that so far in our discussion, hydrogen is not so green. How can we make sure that when you consider the whole life cycle of decarbonization technology, including hydrogen, you can make sure that you produce a positive contribution to the climate. But also, how can you set up the right coalitions of actors to make sure that you could implement the big deals, as was mentioned by Lorentz? Who needs to be at the table? How can you set up the big coalitions of actors so that you can enact this regional transformation that we will need? What we're doing in this space, we have set up a task force to reflect on those challenges, and we are trying to set up the coalition of actors that would be able to enable those greening type of approaches that were mentioned so far. I don't know if this makes all sense, but I think this is who we are and how we are positioned in this debate.
Thank you. I would like to take the four of you on an experiment where we do a task list, or we do a list of jobs that needs to be done in the segments we just discussed to facilitate the scaling. And I would like to add a first word, which Bernhard has already brought up. It's the bankability of the projects, of course. We like to ask this question. You run into the president or prime minister of your country, whoever he or she may be, or the chancellor in Germany, and they give you 3 wishes. He says, hey, Noam, you have 3 wishes to drive the scale up of hydrogen. If I may start with you again, and I'll walk through all of you, and we'll take notes on that. What would these wishes be? Maybe not limited to your country. It could be general wishes that a top politician could fulfill.
Tough one. Okay.
Sorry, that was not pre-discussed. I sort of, that was not in the pre. So no, I'm seriously surprised.
So I mean, I think Magnolia hinted before at a point which is absolutely critical that underpins pretty much anything we're going to do if we want to scale green hydrogen. It's the availability of renewable energy at scale. I think that's number one. You got to start with this. If you don't have available renewable electricity at scale, no green hydrogen.
Okay.
So that's kind of number one. You need to significantly increase investments, permitting processes, everything that comes with it to make sure that we are able to scale renewable electricity. That would probably, I guess, be number one. I guess number two is probably linked to the kind of infrastructure that comes with it. Be it existing infrastructure that you need to refurbish to make sure that it's compatible with whatever systems you're looking for, and or obviously the building of new infrastructure. That's kind of the second necessary step if you want to enable that kind of clean hydrogen economy.
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure. There are so many steps. I guess probably the third one is, you know, making sure that whatever you do, there's a joint kind of scale up of both supply and demand.
Okay.
You can't have an unbalanced system because otherwise there's always going to be someone who tells you, I can't do this because I don't see the other side, which we hear a lot. The suppliers who are telling us, oh, we could do much more, but where's the demand going to come from? And we're doing a bit of work on this, but we don't know where the demand is coming from.
Chicken and egg.
And then on the other side, the chicken and egg. And then on the other side, the demand side tells you, oh, but we would be doing so much, but there's so little available. So working with both the supply and the demand side jointly at the same time to kind of enable that scale up, supported by infrastructure. At the very heart of it is renewable electricity, would be the three key things. There are many others, but I have to leave some others for my...
Well, that was pretty strong already, and it's getting harder from speaker to speaker. Bernhard, you'll be the fourth, you'll have the toughest job, but not all of you will have to mention three things, okay? Just add to Noam's list. So I summarize, driving up renewables massively, building the infrastructure we need, renovating or increasing the infrastructure, and second, synchronizing the ramp up of supply and demand. Magnolia, what would you add?
Yeah, to develop these technologies, to support the development of zero carbon fuels for the sectors that will need it, the sectors that will need molecules, decarbonized molecules in a net zero world, I think the first one would be clarity. Clarity for investors. They need to know what is the greenhouse emissions index or carbon index that will be associated with this hydrogen, right? They need to plan, they need to develop engineering projects, and they need to make sure that the hydrogen that they will produce will be accepted by the end users, right? So clarity is very important. I think number two, and also with clarity comes an internationally aligned certification system, right? That's part of one. So I know that one is several items, but we need an international aligned certification system that provides confidence to invest in these technologies. Number two would be policy mechanisms to close the commercialization gap. Because right now, there's not a business case, let's say, a positive business case for these projects and also for companies to deploy hydrogen because it's more expensive than the fossil fuels or the high-emitting fuels they are using today, right? So we also need policy mechanisms to close that gap. And when we close that gap, let's say the difference between the high-emitting fuel that these end users are using today, let's say shipping, right? Bunkering fuel, it's very pollutant. So if we replace that with ammonia, there's a gap. And how can we close that gap to develop the market? And also when we do that, then also investors will move forward and technology will develop as well with the scaling until we reach economies of scale. And then if I would have to mention a third one is embrace optionality. Embrace optionality. So what does that mean? That we need a series of climate, let's say, hydrogen production pathways to meet the challenge that we have, right? So let's embrace optionality. And even within the electrolyzers, that's true, right? Because, for example, some of the promising electrolyzers for nuclear energy or super hot rock geothermal, they're more efficient than the other electrolyzers, up to 30% more efficient. That's very exciting. And if we don't embrace that optionality, we don't allow that technology to develop. And that will be crucial to meet the hydrogen challenge. So, and if I can say one more, it's just, let's move away from volumes. Let's move away from colors, talking about colors, and let's talk about volumes. The volumes that we need, because the sectors that will need hydrogen are crucial to develop the infrastructure that we need for the future. Think about steel, right? We need hydrogen to produce steel, and with the steel we'll produce wind turbines, and that's decarbonized energy. So yeah, that's what I wanted to mention.
Thank you. You have both exceeded your time and your amount of wishes, but we take note of this because it's an important comment. Martin, over to you. What would you add? What would you like from your particular perspective on the topic? Is there anything you would like to add to this list?
I would just like to emphasize maybe this idea of developing the markets and finding the right balance of incentives to make this transition happening, be it the CO2 price, be it the right business models, having the first movers, so that this starts to scale and to happen. Then you need to continue to invest into new technologies, material technologies, decarbonization technologies, and try to scout further, because a lot of things are not there that would make this transition profitable. And last point I would like to make is coalition building. I think this takes not only one set of actors, not only the private sector alone, not only governments alone can make this. So we should really start to put the right set of actors at the table so that we can start pushing that forward.
Thank you very much. By the way, I'm not answering WhatsApps. I'm keeping the list for you so I can keep track of that. Bernhard, do you have anything to add to this list?
Well, it's a very good list, and that shows that you have a great panel here. And I would like to emphasize 2 points that basically at least Magnolia made. I think we have to rethink on the demand side, Magnolia, where we really need the molecules and where we can replace the molecules through direct electrification. For example, in transportation, I would say it doesn't make sense to work with e-fuels. In aviation, we have to work with e-fuels. So I believe that green hydrogen for the time being will be a scarce resource. So I like your point. Let's focus on the demand side while building and investing in the right infrastructure to the right branches of industry, knowing that we cannot in the short term, let's say 15 years, deliver sufficient amount of green hydrogen into all. And that brings me to my second point. Let's carefully invest in the bridge. And I think for the bridging, blue hydrogen is important, but let's do it in the right way, that we have blue hydrogen where we already know that where we can use the emissions by really 95% with the new technology that we have. Those would be my 2 first. And the third one is, we need smart platforms to bring supply and demand together and manage to finance the supply side. And for those platforms, we need development agencies, we need public investor banks, and we need private banks that play this role. And this is what I'm most concerned of, because of the time that we have, so few time, that we get in the next 18 months the bankability question solved, to make it solved, to really make the things happen that we need.
Thank you very much, Bernhard, and thank you to all the others. First of all, the fact that talking about details of hydrogen, the room is still packed with people, shows that it must be a great panel. I would like to add one thing to the list before opening it up to questions. So please, dear audience, think about questions you might to ask these experts. It's a great opportunity having them all in one room, be it virtual or on-site. I'd like to add, and you might disagree, but I think the credibility of whatever system we implement regarding the integrity of the climate effect is critical. For example, talking approaches in non-classic green hydrogen approaches, it will be very important that it's crystal clear there's no leakage or hidden effect such as we've had in aviation for a long time, where it was completely underestimated beyond the carbon dioxide, how strong this effect is. Okay, There's the first question, the first row. Maybe somebody from my team or so can, that was 1, 2, 3, can hand over the second microphone. We have one here. Maybe I'll hand it over. So you were first, and then you were second. Please. It's like at a rock concert here. So please say a word who you are, and then ask a brief question. Thank you.
Okay. My name is Ingo Pohl from South Pole Group. We work on also carbon methodologies for green hydrogen. But on the recommendation side, what drove down the price of renewables initially when the cost was high was a German feed-in tariff. So de-risking early investment by guaranteeing prices for early investment and then bringing that subsidy, so to speak, down. And I think it created all of the investment certainty that we needed. And I would like to add it kind of like to the list of recommendation to consider a similar structure for the promotion of green hydrogen in this early phase.
I'll add it to the list as an audience comment, okay? Great, thank you. By the way, another commercial for this afternoon. We'll have an overview on the decreasing cost in electrolyzers and the solar PV, for example, through the German EEG in the afternoon. Sir, you were next, please. Brief question.
Yeah, I am a journalist from India. I have this question anyone can take. Now, green hydrogen has become almost synonymous with electrolysis. Now, what is the status of non-electrolysis green hydrogen technologies in the world? And why are we not talking enough of them? I keep hearing about natural gas pyrolysis and so on and so forth. Another thing I hear is what is called gold hydrogen. Apparently, you can get hydrogen from below the ground like you mine natural gas. I don't see that figuring in narratives like this. Why is that so? Is it so difficult to get it? And finally, Bernhard and others spoke about demand, the importance of demand side. Now in India, the Indian government is thinking of bringing a green hydrogen purchase obligation. Sectors like steel and cement will have to, by law, buy a certain portion of green hydrogen. Are there similar approaches in other countries? Please give me a perspective. Thank you.
Who wants to take this? Somebody online or Magnolia? Maybe Bernhard, you want to add after this, but shall we go first? Bernhard, you want to go first? Magnolia is giving you the floor. You go.
So with regards to the so I'm going to start with the last question, if that's okay. Yes, so for example, the European Commission released a proposal where there's a percentage of hydrogen that needs to be green in the industry. So yes, that's something similar and has been done in other geographies. So yeah, if that answers the questions. Then there are other technologies that are being assessed for the hydrogen production, like what you were mentioning, right? Like the gold hydrogen, hydrogen using production with solar, concentrated solar, etc. Yes, but those technologies are a very low technology readiness level. And when you look at the scale of the challenge that we have ahead, those technologies are very, let's say, can contribute in the future when technology is more developed. There are some other ones that look at hydrogen also, transportation, for example, bonded to some molecules that are solid. And that's also there, but at the moment, technology readiness level is low, and it will not help to, at the moment, if you deploy, not to move the needle, if you will. So where we're focusing in those technologies that you can scale right now and to produce hydrogen.
Thank you, Magnolia.
Electrolysis, yeah.
Quick comment from Noam on that. Bernhard, is that all right? Go ahead.
So just a very quick point on the requirements. There's the requirements, indeed. For example, like, you know, what's being discussed in the EU, there's the blending topic as well, which is quite strong too. Something else that I wanted to highlight is the voluntary approaches too. The voluntary kind of approaches or kind of initiatives. Something that you might have heard of here at COP, which was launched last year at COP26. The World Economic Forum is kind of quite strongly involved with this, something called the First Movers Coalition. And it's basically, you know, companies coming together committing to procure green products, you know, in a particular sector, steel, cement, shipping, aviation, etc. So it doesn't necessarily say we're going to buy X volumes of green hydrogen, but down the line, if you have 30 companies that came together to say we're going to procure 10% green steel by 2030, that's going to require that green steel to be produced through a number of technologies, including green hydrogen, for instance. And so we're trying to do that work right now, which is basically to translate what these commitments, voluntary made, look like, and how they can help significantly ramp up or boost the clean hydrogen market and economy overall. Eventually, you might think that these voluntary approaches might get some sort of a translation into a bit more of a regulatory approach, but that's probably kind of a second step.
Thank you, Noam. Now, Bernhard, anything urgent to add, or maybe we come to the next question? That's great, because we have more people waiting. Yeah, we have two. First, the gentleman was here first, and then we take your question. Let's ask the question, bundle them, and then it's over to the panel, and thank you.
Sure. Hi, thank you for your knowledgeable perspectives. I'm a student at Duke University, and I'm really interested in green hydrogen. Well, I've been researching it, and one of the key inputs is available land for renewable energy capacity, right? But I'm also interested in the role of cities and urban areas in the climate fight. And so my question is, although a lot of the projected supply is going to be coming from the global south, where there's a lot of available land in South America, in Africa, in the Middle East, in India, what is the role of cities, maybe to create demand for green hydrogen? What are specific policy recommendations that urban areas can take to improve the demand, or improve the demand for green hydrogen?
Thank you. And next question, please.
Thank you for this great panel. Bernhard, you referred to blue hydrogen as a bridge, and given what it will take to build that kind of long-lived infrastructure, how much oil and gas is underground to generate blue hydrogen, I'm wondering sort of how long you think the bridge is. And relatedly, what is the regulatory structure? Obviously, we need one. I'm a practicing lawyer in the US. What would be your wishes for the regulatory structure, including all of the pollution that does come from hydrogen production?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Now, minding the time, Bernhard has the first answer. All of you have an answer, and please try to answer these questions, and also, if you still want to give a summarizing remark, and I would first like to give the floor to Bernhard.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, the colleague, my dear colleague, I'm also a lawyer in the US, I would expect that the US will come up with very similar proposals, policy proposals regarding the regulation of blue hydrogen with regard to their emission traction that Magnolia referred to, and Noam, what we have and we expect in the EU and in Germany coming up very soon, which means that this is really a milestone in our way to regulate blue hydrogen. I do consider it as a bridge because we need big investments now in the steel industry with a perspective to green hydrogen. And on the way to get the sufficient amount of green hydrogen, we need to use blue. That's why I'm always advocating for blue, because we need it for some while. I do think that in the long run, that if like mid-30s, that's at least what the market consultations say us that we have done here in Germany and Europe. We see that in the mid-30s, we will have blue hydrogen on a much higher price than green hydrogen. That's what I expect on the market. And then green hydrogen will automatically on the marketplace push the blue hydrogen away. That's what I expect. Actually, my economist team is globally doing the first modeling for a green hydrogen market for the 2030 years, what I'm hoping to present in Davos, which will be kind of the first modeling of how that mechanism can work, how market mechanisms can work with regard to this global emerging market, which brings me back to my point that we need platforms to run this. Back to you.
Thank you, Bernhard, for this opinion. Also, the blue hydrogen is particularly controversial, as we know, but it's great bringing up the debate. Now, who wants to go next of our panel? Any volunteers? Maybe Martin, do you want to continue with an answer or with a concluding perspective on this?
Just maybe quick on the cities, and how do you connect, the place of supply with the places of demand? And this is where you need a lot of also as well, diplomacy crafting, because as we see, there is a big gap between what we heard about the place of production of renewable energies and the place of consumption. So how can you bridge this gap, and how can you set up the right coalitions of actors to make sure that you could develop something that comes close to a win-win situations where every partner finds its way. I mean, this is one of the biggest challenges that I see personally, is to build those extra regional, global north-south collaborations around this project that would be required to make the transition happen.
Thank you very much. Now, our two on-site participants. Noam wants to go first.
So, very quick point. You're absolutely right. It's going to be a matter of international hubs connected between one another, and so key regions like Latin America, the Middle East and North Africa, in which we are today, India, will need to find ways to better connect them with one another between major production and local kind of consumption hubs. But if you want to break it down into kind of more local approaches, indeed, the role of kind of city areas is going to be critical. Industrial areas, or so-called industrial clusters, too, is also going to be absolutely critical. As a matter of fact, to date, is probably where there are the most compelling kind of existing examples of co-location of supply and demand for green hydrogen, which include, and by the way, all different sources of hydrogen, which includes, for example, ports, which gives you that connection of local to global. So the hydrogen market is going to be a global market with a significant number of kind of interconnected local hubs. And that's kind of, I think that key kind of interaction dimension needs to be taken into account if you really want to look at significant scale.
Thank you. And short closing remarks by Magnolia, Tovar.
So I just wanted to give a quick example. For example, the city of Rotterdam is planning to become Europe's largest hydrogen hub, and as the city of Rotterdam, and it will import a lot of hydrogen, and then that will be distributed in Germany for the industrial sector in other cities. So that's an example of hydrogen hubs that has been planned. That was it.
Thank you, everybody. Let's give our panel a warm applause. We've reached the end of the session, unfortunately. This was great. Thank you very much. Let me do a quick promotion for the next panel. We'll do a 2-minute break. We'll be talking heavy industry next, in particular cement, steel production, these kinds of things, and hydrogen. And the question of the gentleman here, we'll talk about early TRL level electrolysis, alternatives to electrolysis this afternoon. So thank you all for coming. Grab a coffee, grab a glass of water, and we'll continue soon. Thank you very much.